Please listen carefully.
Good afternoon and welcome to the first broadcast of Ray of Life Radio, sponsored by Caldwell & Cowan Funeral Home. My name is Adam Cooper and I'm going to be with you every Friday from noon to 1, having an open discussion about faith, life, grief, and bereavement. We'll also be playing contemporary Christian music by some well-known artists as well as some very talented local artists. We'll also have special guests that will come in occasionally and join us in the discussion. So call in at 678-212-0310. Ray of Life Radio, WGFS 1430. Good afternoon. Welcome to Ray of Life Radio, sponsored by Caldwell & Cowan Funeral Home. My name is Adam Cooper. I'm here with my wife, Angie Cooper. And today we're going to be talking a little bit about life, death, grief, and bereavement. Talking a little bit about what grief really is. That last song was Live It Out by Scott England from his album Redeemed and Braved. Scott is one of the worship leaders at East Ridge Community Church here in Covington. So let's get the discussion started. You can call in at 678-212-0310. You can go to facebook.com/Ray of Life Radio, Twitter at Ray of Life Radio, or even email us at rayofliferadio@gmail.com. So, Angie, can you give me a little background about what you do?
I work at Caldwell & Cowan Funeral Home and do accounts receivable, and also I am a grief facilitator with you, obviously, on on Thursday nights is when we have our grief support groups.
All right. And I know that you've experienced a number of losses in your life in the years. Can you tell us a little bit about those?
Yes. My mom died about 8 years ago. A little background of that. At the time, when I did go through that, there weren't really support groups around.
Right, okay.
So when she died, I kind of closed off, shut down, really just didn't know how to handle it.
Yeah.
So pretty much wasn't able to cope or really to go on with life. Everything seemed to be going on around me at the time.
Yeah. I know that the community at large has experienced a lot of grief this week. I know that we had the young girl that was killed at the theme school by accident, and then there was also a young gentleman that was hung this week, or he died this week, and another shooting. So grief is all around us. We suffer grief all in a myriad of ways. We can lose our jobs, we can lose relationships, but most people associate grief with death. And a lot of people have some interesting myths about grief, don't they, Angie?
Oh, yeah.
One of the biggest things is our culture has gotten to the point where we want things over with now. When we experience grief, we want to get through it, we want to get on with our lives, and we don't want to have to deal with it. Is that pretty much what you...
Yes. They always ask us, how long is this going to last? When am I going to be over with this?
Yeah. One of the biggest myths we've gotten is grief only lasts a few weeks and several months at the most. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, a lot of people come up to you and say, "Aren't you over that yet?"
Yeah.
You should be getting on with life now.
And that's not the way it should be, is it?
No.
The reality is that grief has no particular timetable. Grief can last for years. It's really something that you never really get over. You just sort of get through it and you continue with your new life because life is never the same after you lose a loved one. Another one we've heard quite often is time heals all wounds. Again, going back to what we just talked about, there's no amount of time that can really make grief go away. The reality is it just gets a little easier to cope with. But much like a scar, the memory of grief just lingers with us. Can you tell me, I know that your dad recently passed away. Can you tell me how your walk through grief was a little different with that than it was with your mom?
Yes, because of what I went through with my mom when my dad died in April, I was able to reflect back of the times when I learned that it's okay to have those moments crying in Walmart. It's okay to be mad. It's okay to cry. It's okay to have those feelings. And once you realize it's okay to have those feelings and to go through them, then you heal properly if you go ahead and have those moments. Because the more you suppress those moments, the longer it takes you to heal.
What happens if we suppress those feelings?
Well, they can make you sick.
Yeah.
They can cause you to stress. It just prolongs the inevitable of having to deal with those over time.
One of the biggest things we say too is it's kind of like a boiling pot with a tight lid on it. If it boils long enough, it's eventually going to explode, and that's what happens to us as humans. Is we experience grief, and grief tends to like to layer itself. If we have a loss in our life, and we don't process through it properly, then another one will go right on top of it, and it makes the grief we experience that much more intense. So we've got to make sure that we process grief as we get to it. That's a very, very vital and important thing we have to do. We have to make sure we really just grab it and we just work our way through it. Somebody I respect said that grief's kind of like a wave. You're standing on the beach and you're just looking out, and these waves are coming in. You've got three options. You can either run from the wave and probably get knocked down as it comes in upon you, or you can just stand there and do nothing, and you'll probably still get knocked down when it comes upon you, or you can dive into it and come out on the backside of the wave, standing up, living some semblance of a normal life, and that's kind of the way grief is. One of the last myths I want to talk about before we go to another song is a lot of people think that if you have faith, you shouldn't grieve. Have you heard that?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
One of the things is, it always helps as we're going through grief to have some sort of belief system that can give you hope. As Christians, Angie and I are both Christians, it's spiritually healthy to grieve. In Christianity, God was grieved many times over the actions of the Jews, and Jesus openly wept and grieved when his friend Lazarus died. So grief is spiritually acceptable, and we're kind of brought up in that mentality where you got to keep that stiff upper lip. It's okay for a guy to cry. It's okay for you to cry in Walmart. It's okay for you to cry in the drive-thru at McDonald's, because, as we like to call those drive-thru moments, you never know when they're going to happen. But it's God's way of allowing you to deal with all the emotions and feelings surrounding your loss. It's very important. So I'll tell you what we're going to do. Again, call in at 678-212-0310. I'd love to hear what you have to say on the topic. Or you can go to facebook.com/Ray of Life Radio and send in your question that way, or Twitter at Ray of Life Radio. And email us at rayofliferadio@gmail.com. Next song I'm going to play, hold on one second, we've got a phone call coming in. Yes, sir. How are you today? WGFS AM 1430.
Thank you for receiving my call.
Yes, sir.
Listen, grief is hard.
It is. It's real hard.
It's very hard, Christian or no Christian. It's hard to see someone you care about leaving and not knowing where they're going, or hopefully you think you know where they're going.
Yes, sir.
And I suffered when I lost my dad. He wasn't a Christian.
Yes, sir.
And I am, and he was the joy of my life.
Mm-hmm.
So losing him at the time I did, no one can give me answers that will comfort me in knowing of his departure.
Yes, sir.
But I guess the show that you're bringing or are bringing is to encourage us to keep looking up.
Yes, sir.
But it's hard. It's just very hard.
It is.
What can you say about that?
It's very hard for us to keep looking up. A lot of times, death can cause us to question our faith and question our belief, especially in instances where we have loved ones that we may not know whether they've made that decision. The good thing is that the decision to follow Christ is between the person and God. We may not know if a person has made that decision in their life. They may not live. You may not see fruit. But you don't know if they've made that personal decision. And that's the thing with Christ, is he allows us to have that personal relationship. And it's always great to know that that decision's not left up to us. If we didn't know for sure, there's no guarantee that that person hadn't had that discussion on their own. And that's one way that I recommend that you have some hope.
What about between husband and wife when they've been married for a long time and God decides to take one? What are they to do? How are they supposed to hold on? Many couples declared that from that very day they're going to die with
Yes, sir.
with the loved one. I mean, was it God really thinking about us in that sense when He wanted us to be together forever, and then knowing that He's going to take one sooner than the other and leave one?
That's a good question. A lot of times we as humans try to analyze God's motives, and unfortunately we don't have that capability. God is all present, all powerful, and He makes the decisions that He makes. But a lot of times, we just have to trust that God's got a greater plan, and those that are left behind, we really try to help them work through their grief in a way where they don't become embittered, where they don't have that just lostness to them. And it's good to have them work in a group with other people where they are able to make other bonds.
I would say to try to find the blessings in.
Yes. Yeah, that's very good. Thank you, Angie. Try to find the blessings. Try to find the good side of what may come out of this. At the time, it's impossible to think that anything good could come out of it. But it's always important to try to find that in all things we do.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate you calling in. Again, welcome back to Ray of Life Radio on WGFS 1430 AM in Covington, Georgia. We're having an open discussion today about grief. What is grief? You can call in to join the conversation at 678-212-0310. You can join us on Facebook.com/Ray of Life Radio, on Twitter at Ray of Life Radio, and email us at rayofliferadio@gmail.com. So we're back with Angie, our special guest today, my wife, who also does grief facilitation with me, who kind of got into this after her own loss. Actually, that's kind of how we both got into this, because I watched what she went through when her mother died in 2008. And there was not really a resource available that allowed you to be able to properly process through your grief. And that's one of the important things that we realized from that. And God kind of directed us right into being able to help others with this. So this is a calling to us. This is a ministry to us. And, we're just glad we are able to communicate this to everyone locally. I get passionate about this, so I kind of will get talking fast, and Angie's told me I need to slow down. So we're going to kind of keep the conversation going now. And we're talking about myths. What are some of the myths people believe about grief? One of the ones we have is that expressions of grief have no place in public. A lot of people believe that all their grieving should be behind doors, right? Mm-hmm. They shouldn't cry in public. They shouldn't cry at church. They shouldn't cry in the grocery store.
They shouldn't cry in front of their children.
Right. And a lot of things, culture has really done a disservice to us in this way, because really, if we cry in front of our children, if our children see how we process our own grief, it makes them healthier grievers when they get older. When they experience loss, which they will, we're not immune to loss, they will be able to go through it a little bit better.
That's right.
I know that with your walk, Angie, you've kind of had some public grief experiences.
Yes.
Any you're willing to share?
I would think that one that's really hit home recently was I was at Michael's, just tooling around, looking at Michael's like any lady would do. I saw a frame with a picture of a mom and like two girls, which I would think of as daughters, and I just lost it. I stood there bawling and crying in front of Michael's, and it just reminded me of myself and my sister and my mom. And I had a little lady come over, and she said, "Hun, are you okay?" And I said, "Yes, ma'am." I said, that frame just reminds me of my mom. And I just sat and cried. She said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I miss my mom too." And, she understood. And I just sat there and cried a little bit, collected myself, and got through that moment and went on. It's just those times that you have to go through it.
You do. And, that's one of the things people don't understand is one of our other griefs or myths is that people believe you shouldn't cry during grief. But a good cry is necessary every once in a while. There's a release, a chemical release that the body does. When you have a good, deep, sobbing cry, the body actually releases certain chemicals that actually help us process through our grief. So it's important to have a good cry. And really, they've actually done tests where there's a different chemical composition of tears that are cried in pain and tears that are cried over loss, the intense, sobbing, grieving cry. So it's important. And a lot of times we can't control when our tears come. I mentioned in the previous segment about drive-through moments. And we like to joke around about those. You're sitting in the drive-through at McDonald's waiting to order your midday meal or even an evening meal, and a song comes over the radio or a smell happens to trigger something, and you can't help but break down crying, thinking about a loved one that's gone. And those times are when you're sitting in your car crying and everybody around you is looking at you like you're crazy. Well, let us be the first to tell you that you're not crazy. You're normal. There's a lot of people out there like you who are experiencing grief, and you just happen to have a moment when you had to release some tears. And like I said, that boiling pot, we have to release the pressure from that boiling pot. Go ahead.
I was going to say that's one of the things that we tell our grief support group is at our facility. It's okay to cry. It's a safe place.
Yes.
We give everybody just about a box of tissues because we say, come on in and cry. Because I'm sure your friends are tired of, maybe seeing you cry. But it's okay. Where we get together, everybody just about cries. But it's okay. It's a good healing cry. And after they do cry, they feel good once they've done it. So it's okay.
I'm glad you brought up safety because I want this to be a safe place where people can call in too. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to ask your name. I'm not going to ask you any identifying information. If you've got a question, we're going to answer it. We're going to answer it honestly. We're going to answer it from a Christian viewpoint. But we're going to answer it the best we can based on our knowledge and experience. So feel free to make that call. I'm sorry?
I was going to say another thing is a lot of times if you know someone's going through grief, a lot of people think that the best thing they can do is leave someone alone. That is the worst thing you can do is
right.
Leave them alone. Check on them, even if it's just a quick phone call to let them know you're thinking about them. Because they could be sitting in a house alone, dwelling in the grief. They just need to know someone does care. Because when they are ready to reach out, they may reach out to you just for to talk. And so a lot of people feel like, well, they've just left me, and then they start dwelling in the grief, and that can be unsafe and
problematic.
Right.
Definitely.
That's right.
And I'm glad you brought that up because sometimes they will leave you alone, but then sometimes they will say things that I hate to use this word, but they're not the brightest things to say in the world. And that's one of the things that we get a lot too. People saying things that are taken insensitively.
Well, remember, we are in the South.
Yes, we are in the South. And it's a common thing in the South to say, how you doing, with a smile. A lot of times we really don't want to know how you're doing. We just say how you doing because it's what we were raised to do. But when somebody's in grief, that how you doing could be an invitation for them to open up and share. But a lot of times we don't have that intent. And for that reason, it kind of can get kind of weird.
I was going to say, working at a funeral home, people come in and I know what they're going through, and I catch myself sometimes going, hey, how are you doing? And then I think, oh my gosh, I just asked them that question. Yep. But just know the intent of someone's heart is
very good.
They actually want to know how you're doing, and maybe even if you can get them a cup of water or something, we really just want to know, is there something we can do for you?
Exactly. Doing what we do, it's hard a lot of times for us to be able to connect with people because we have raised that stigma to where we're not supposed to grieve in public. So trying to make people aware of what we deal with on a daily basis, trying to make people aware of what their grief is going to look like, is kind of difficult. That's why I'm glad we're here on WGFS Radio to be able to communicate to the community and be able to get people to hopefully call in and talk with us that may not necessarily have an avenue to talk with anyone on a normal basis. But one thing you said was very important. It's always examining the intent of what the person says. It may have been the most awkward thing that you have ever heard in your life. You may think that they stuck their foot so far in their mouth that they're tasting their heel, but it's important to think about their intent. A lot of times we do that because we're trying to make ourselves feel better, and it's more about us than it is about the griever, and it's important that we deal with that properly.
Especially for younger ladies,
Oh, yes.
things like that. They will say, "Oh, well, you're young, you'll meet somebody," but really what they're saying, I mean, they're trying to be positive. They're trying to say you are young, and one day you know, might meet someone else. And at the time, what you're going through, I'm sure you just don't feel that way, and that's okay.
Yeah.
But they're just wording it wrong.
Right.
They mean it well, and they mean it from their heart.
That's right, and that's that's an important thing to remember. They mean it from their hearts, and God gives us our hearts, and He wants us to try to help people, but a lot of times we fail miserably. It's important, though, that you find a place where you are safe, where you can open up, where you can share, whether that be in a grief group like we do every Thursday night at 6 o'clock, or whether it be a group of friends or even a church family. A lot of times church families are closer than your blood family. And it's important that we try to make sure that we try to keep contact with people. Hold one second for me. Got a call coming in. Hello, you're on WGFS Radio.
Yes, good evening.
Good evening.
Afternoon.
Thank you.
I'm just calling in about things that I have gone through, experience of death. And, I truly know that when we have to all experience this, but in each case it's so different. I've had the loss of my siblings. I've had the loss of my parents, but the greatest loss was the loss of my son.
Yes, ma'am.
And I've had to, in fact, really plan most of those services.
Wow.
But the one of my son, it just floored me, and I couldn't do it.
Yes, ma'am.
And so my son, my daughter, and my children actually took over because it was just such a hard experience.
Yes, ma'am.
But also knowing I knew where my son
Very good.
went.
Yes, ma'am.
So, his relationship with the Lord
Yes.
was so phenomenal. So I had to find peace in that.
That's good.
And with each one of them, but that was the hardest.
Right.
But I will say to anyone that's listening, if you have a relationship with our Heavenly Father,
right,
you will find peace.
That's exactly right. And I'm glad you did say that, because all of our strength comes from Christ.
Yes.
We don't have the power to go through this on our own, do we?
No, we don't.
That's right. Christ
and
is
it's only
important.
through Him that you will sustain and you will go
Yes, ma'am.
through. And we have to trust in Him, knowing that everything that we feel and everything that happens to us in life, if we hold on to God's unchanging hand,
Yes, ma'am.
we will make it through.
That's exactly
Amen.
right.
Thank you.
Yeah. A lot of times, especially in situations where you've had multiple deaths like you've experienced, it's always important that we try to work through each one of those as individually as possible.
Yes, that's true.
The loss of your son may have impacted you the most, but it's other losses in your life that are also influencing how that is impacting you. So
Yes, it does.
we have to kind of break it apart like an onion and take each layer as it comes to us.
Grieve them separately.
Yes, we have to grieve them separately. We actually have a gentleman in one of our grief groups now who has lost his brother and his father, and he says he very rarely grieves for them both at the same time. He's grieving for each one individually.
It doesn't happen all at the same time.
Right.
You can be in your daily routines, and all of a sudden it'll hit you with
Yes, ma'am.
one or the other.
You're right. And sometimes it will hit you hard, won't it?
Yes.
What do you do on days when it hits you hard like that?
Well, I just talk to my Father. I just talk to the Lord and say, okay, Lord, I go through the experience. knowing, remembering the joy that I had with
Yes, ma'am.
each one of them.
Yes, ma'am.
It's always something that you can pick up on that you will remember. And it's always good not to dwell on the negative, but to dwell on the good things.
Yes,
so
ma'am.
when you experience that time, remember something good that they brought into your life.
Exactly. And that's the thing is a lot of times we dwell over what we've lost, rather than what we had.
Mm-hmm.
And as Christians, we should really celebrate because we know
Yes,
where they're going.
We should.
Yes, ma'am.
And that's what I do. I remember the wonderful things, the funny things,
Yes, ma'am.
the joyous things that they brought to us. And that's how I would like somebody to remember me, the great things that I've done and the wonderful things that touched your life.
Yes,
So,
ma'am. It's important to do that. We've actually experienced a number of funerals working at a funeral home, and you may find this interesting that funerals are really made to the personality of the person that has died. Where
Yes, it is.
it becomes a celebration of life
Yes,
rather
it
than
is.
a mourning and a sad time where we look at death. And that's the way we should be doing it. We should be celebrating the life of the person that God allowed us to love.
Right.
Right? Well, I appreciate your call in, and
Okay,
thank
thank you
you
so
so
much.
much. Bye-bye.
All right.
Again, this is Ray of Life Radio on WGFS AM 1430 in Covington, Georgia. The number to call in is 678-212-0310 or Facebook.com/Ray of Life Radio or Twitter @Ray of Life Radio. We're going to pick up, Angie, I know that wasn't in your ear, so you couldn't really hear much of what she said, but she was talking about she had a couple of losses in her life, and she had a really big loss of her son, and that was what hit her the hardest.
Right.
And she said that she tries to focus, like you said, on the positives and not trying to become mired down in the negatives of what she has lost. And I think that's a really great positive attitude, to realize that our strength comes from God, and it's only through Him that we're able to make this work.
That's right.
Yeah. Another myth, we're going to throw another one out here before we play another song. Keeping busy is the best way to deal with grief. What do you say about that one?
It's going to chase you down no matter how busy you stay.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just going to chase you down.
You're right. A lot of people tend to try to work and work and work and work and work and work and work, thinking that they won't be able to think about their loved one while they're working. So they think that by ignoring it will go away. In all reality, it makes it worse. It makes it to the point where we do start becoming physically ill. We
That's
do
right.
start having emotional problems. We do start experiencing things that really our bodies are not intended for. We must experience the emotions that come along with loss.
That's
It is vitally important. If you are mad, be mad. If you are sad, be sad. You just have to do it in a way that doesn't hurt you, doesn't hurt anyone else, and it's productive. We have grievers a lot that do say that they're angry. Some will say they're angry at God, and that's okay.
We even allow that in our group. I mean, Adam has said that we are Christians, and it's okay. I mean, at that moment, we say it's okay to be angry at God. However, we don't encourage them to stay angry at God.
Right.
At that moment, it's okay.
It's normal for anyone experiencing grief to have that momentary doubt that's brought about by the loss. But you know what? If we're mad at God, we're not the first, and we're definitely not going to be the last. And God can take it. He's all powerful. He's all knowing. He knows what we're experiencing, and it's important. You got to figure out. He lived with us for 33 years. He got to feel our emotions. He knows what we're dealing with better than we do in a lot of cases. Mm-hmm. So it's important to really turn to Him and draw from Him. But if you try to keep yourself busy, you're going to wind up working yourself into an illness.
That's right.
And it's very important that we just
And then you'll end up having to see the doctor for yourself.
Right.
And then your family's going to have to end up being concerned about you.
Right. And you don't want to complicate a loss with another illness of some sort.
That's right. That's
so,
true.
Welcome back to WGFS AM 1430 in Covington, Georgia. I'm new to all this. Can you tell? So we're in the studio today with Angie Cooper. She's my wife. She's also a grief facilitator for Caldwell and Cowan Funeral Home, our sponsor for this show. And I think it's important that we're talking about some of the myths that people believe about grief. And there's a lot of them out there, aren't there?
Yes, there are.
Some others kind of get a little different. People tend to tell us we need to move on with our life in order to get over our grief. What have you experienced with that?
I haven't really thought about that one. Kind of caught me off guard. I would just say when they say to move on, no matter how quick you try to move on, you will never get over your grief. It's something that's always in your life. So I don't think I tried to move on from my grief. I tried to accept the grief and try to change the grief into a positive.
Very good.
Used to, I would hear like Amazing Grace, bawl and cry, bawl and cry. Now, when I hear Amazing Grace, I think, wow, God's allowed me to hear Amazing Grace at this time, at this moment.
Oh, excellent.
So I've kind of changed that into it, instead of a sad thing, into a positive thing.
Oh, okay. Along that line, I'm glad you brought that up. We're going to talk about something. One of our grievers has kind of given us a phrase for this. We call them God winks.
Oh, yeah.
It's those times when, God is showing us that our loved one's fine. God is showing us that our loved one is there with him. And they're not having to experience the trials and turmoils and the monsters that we face every day in this life. They're removed from the world, and that's a great thing. But these God winks are amazing. One of the ones she talked to about was in their concrete driveway, a flower came up through the cracks, just a single flower. And it happened to be one of her favorite flowers. And she took that as a wink from God that her husband was in a safe place. And it's things like that where we could see that flower and make it a negative. Oh, I'm sad because there's a flower, and that was our favorite kind. But you turn it into like, I know they're with God. I know they're great. I know things are working well for them.
Sure.
Tell me about some of your God winks. I know that you've got a few.
Well, when I see hummingbirds, I think of my mom. When I see cardinals, I think of my dad. But sometimes I'll see things in shapes that look like hummingbirds. Just to put it funny, I saw some bird poop.
Can we say that?
I don't know. I just did, but it looked like a hummingbird. And if you want to see it, I have it on Facebook. But anyway, it's strange how some things you look at it and you think, that really does look like a hummingbird. So it's my way, I guess, or to me, it's God's way of showing me my mom's still with me. Right. She may not be here in the physical, but she's here in the spiritual. In the spiritual,
and that's amazing. You would not believe the pictures of things that I've gotten that look like hummingbirds, and it's really interesting when God winks at us like that. Yeah. And I think that's an important thing. We've got to turn that negative into a positive. Again, that's why we're here. We're here to try to help you make that transition. Again, WGFS AM 1430 in Covington. You can call in at 678-212-0310. Ray of Life Radio. You can go to Facebook.com/Ray of Life Radio, or you can go to Twitter @Ray of Life Radio.
Talk about reframe.
Reframing. I'm glad you brought that up. Reframing is an important thing we have to look at, and it kind of goes with what we just talked about with the God winks. There are times in our lives when we have to choose to take the negative and try to look at it differently. A lot of people have come up with the phrase "make lemonade out of lemons." I don't really tie the two of those together, but it's more along the line of taking something that could be extremely painful and looking at it from a different way that actually brings us joy, remembering the person that was with us for so long rather than bringing us pain and remembering and focusing on what we've lost.
Some people may have had a traumatic experience with their loved one, with their death. And they tell me sometimes maybe they've had nightmares, etc.
Yes.
So I tell them, as soon as you have that thought flash through your mind, as soon as that happens, think the happiest thought that you can.
Yeah.
Every time, just keep erasing that thought with a positive thought.
Yeah.
And you just have to, it's just anything habit forming, you've got to keep on, just replacing it, and hopefully over time that thought will be gone.
Right.
With a positive thought.
Exactly. A lot of people think that when we're thinking about the deceased person, we're dwelling, and a lot of people think that dwelling on death makes grief worse. Well, dwelling on grief and how they died and what we've lost does make grief worse. But thinking about the person in a way that is joyful, thinking about them in a way that is positive, realizing that God is in control and our loved ones are with Him, and it's important for us to make that connection and just reframe. We call that reframing, putting it in a different point of view, looking at it from a different angle.
Right.
There's the word I was looking for, because it's very important for us to do that.
You were touching back when you were talking about celebrations at my dad's funeral. My dad loved to eat at the Varsity for Father's Day, and so at my dad's funeral, and you could do this, to celebrate your loved one at their birthday or whatever. But at my dad's funeral, we had the Varsity truck come to celebrate him that way at the cemetery and all. But one of the things to do is when their birthday comes is don't hide yourself from anything. Just get out there and buy yourself a gift. I've done that before too, or buy someone else something, or buy somebody a meal in honor of your loved one.
That's right.
Find ways to celebrate your loved one. Don't dwell on what can be a sad situation.
Right. Just
continue to find ways to really just celebrate.
That's right. It's always important to try to find the positive.
That's right.
And it was funny that day that we had her dad's funeral, and we had the Varsity truck pulled up in Longwood Cemetery out on the access road, and I'm sure people riding by were like, "What's the Varsity truck doing in a cemetery?" Well, there's been funerals where they've played Kool and the Gang. They've played all sorts of interesting music that just celebrates the life of the person that we are there to remember.
That's right.
And we don't want to make it something that we dwell on, because it is something that should be a positive thing, and that's what we need to value. We're going to go and we're going to play another song, then we'll be back briefly to close the day out. But you're on WGFS 1430 AM in Covington, Georgia. This is Ray of Life Radio. The number to call in if you want to get in before we're done is 678-212-0310. We're here every Friday from noon to 1, and I just thank WGFS for allowing us to do this. Welcome back to Ray of Life Radio on WGFS AM 1430 in Covington, Georgia. We've had Angie Cooper here with us today in a discussion on grief. Some of the myths we hear about grief on a daily basis. I just want to kind of give you some information. We lead grief groups every Thursday night at 6 p.m. at the Caldwell and Cowan facility on Floyd Street. We have them every Thursday evening except for the fifth Thursday. So every Thursday at 6 p.m. and anyone is welcome to come. This is a ministry that we do. And hopefully just to help people through these tough times in their lives. And remember, grief is not just isolated to death. It can be from a number of other things. But one thing I do want to encourage you also is throughout the week, if you want to send us a Facebook post, a Twitter update, or even an email, I'll try to get to as many of those as I can next week to answer those on the air. Remember, it's facebook.com/rayofliferadio. Twitter is @rayofliferadio, and email rayofliferadio@gmail.com. Got one last song that we're going to go out with today. It's still afternoon, isn't it? But I want to thank Angie for being here, and I want to thank our sponsor, Caldwell and Cowan Funeral Home. Angie?
I was just going to say thanks for having me.
Yep, great. Now the next song is I'll Fly Away by the Pilgrim Jubilee.